Today, we're gonna do the most underrated JRPG in every console. So I'm gonna go by console. I'm gonna start with Nintendo, and I'm gonna share I'm not gonna explain the games. Most of these games, I've covered them to death. And I'm just gonna say the game, mention the game and why I think it's underrated, and then we'll get to you. You guys are gonna mention your picks for that particular console on the chat, and I'll read them. I'm gonna start with the NES, and my NES pick is Crystalis. Why Crystalis, even though it's a brutally hard game that I have a love-hate relationship with? But for a long time was a hidden gem, an underappreciated game, an action RPG that was kind of cryptic, but nowadays with a walkthrough you can just get anywhere. So that's my pick for today, Crystalis. It's a brutally hard game, and it aged kind of decently, you know. It didn't age poorly like other JRPGs on the NES, especially some action RPGs. This one kind of aged decently. It didn't age marvelously, just decent enough. It can still be played and enjoyed today, I believe. So I kind of knew Faxanadu will be here. Someone will bring up Faxanadu. Willow on the NES. Final Fantasy II never came out of Japan. That's another rule for this video. No, only in Japan games. For the SNES, I have Lufia 2, Rise of the Sinistrals. It is a popular game, and some of you will be like, that's not really underrated. Well, it is. It is because it got some decent ratings back then, but barely any ratings. That's my problem with Lufia 2. That it just wasn't as popular. It's a game that had everything to be popular. To be on top. To be up there with Chrono Trigger, with Secret of Mana, with Super Mario RPG, Final Fantasy 2 and 3. Up there with the big ones, man. But for some reason it failed. It didn't fail in reviews. It got a lot of great reviews and ratings. But it was a commercial failure, you know. Copies were barely sold. And you know what? It's been a rare and expensive game. And it's a prequel. You can start with this game if you want to get into the series. So that'll be my pick, guys. The most underrated JRPG on the Super Nintendo, Lufia 2 for me. What about you guys? Breath of Fire 1. I'm glad someone brought Breath of Fire 1 up, because even though it's a very popular game and people know it, it didn't get the best ratings. It's outdated. It didn't age very well, but I like it more than the second one. Terranigma, of course. I consider Terranigma, but I never finished it. So I was like, man, I gotta choose a game that I did finish. So Terranigma, that's a good one. Illusion of Gaia is a forgotten game. It had great ratings back in the day. Nowadays, it just... nobody cares, nobody remembers it. Anyway, moving on to the Nintendo 64. I'm not a fan of the 64, but for the Nintendo 64, I picked Ogre Battle 64. It's not exactly a hidden gem. It's just as easy as to go to Google right now and type RPGs on the 64. Ogre Battle's gonna be there. It's a real-time strategy game. You build your campaign, you micromanage a lot of creatures and platoons, and you conquer lands or defend territories, and you send your troops out there and then get into turn-based battles that are real-time, out of your direct control. It's a very fun game. I do think it got decent ratings, you know. I don't think it's a game that people bring up, you know. When they talk about JRPGs on the 64, they only think of Paper Mario, and that's it. They're like, oh man, 64 has no JRPGs. Well, it does. It barely has them, but it does, and Ogre Battle is one of them. Mega Man Legends? Would you say Mega Man Legends on the 64 is underrated? Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else to pick on the 64 except Ogre Battle. Anyway, guys, so moving on. We're gonna move on to the GameCube. For the GameCube, I chose Baten Kaitos. Why Baten Kaitos, even though it's actually one of the most popular JRPGs on the GameCube? Well, precisely because that's not exactly true. GameCube is a little bit better on JRPGs than the 64, but when people think of JRPGs, they do not think of the GameCube. Okay, they're always saying that, oh, the GameCube had JRPGs? It had more than 20 JRPGs released in North America, in case you didn't know, and now we're getting the remasters of these games. So if the remasters are done properly, and people like them and rate them good, I'm guessing they will no longer be as underrated as they once were, but we need those remasters to work. Baten Kaitos Origins, do you think Origins is more underrated than the first one, Eternal Wings and the Lost Ocean? It could be. I think Origins sold less, and not a lot of people know it. People know the first game. They don't know there's a prequel called Origins. Yu-Gi-Oh! False-Bound Kingdom. That's a good pick. I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is popular, but a lot of people don't know. There are a couple of strategy RPGs on the PS2 and the GameCube. Crystal Chronicles, well, yeah, I mean, it's a very popular game, but it got a lot of trash because the gameplay mechanics weren't for everybody. Evolution Worlds, somebody's bringing a hidden gem up. Evolution Worlds, the problem is that it didn't get a lot of ratings because it's very obscure. It's more of a hidden gem. The Mega Man RPG, Mega Man X Command Mission, that's the name. It also came out on the PS2. Anyway, moving on to the Wii. Into the Wii, my original pick was Tales of Symphonia. But Tales of Symphonia, I think it's very... Instead of being underrated, I think it's overhated. A lot of people hate that game. And I don't think... I think it definitely didn't get the ratings it deserved. But most of the hate came from original Symphonia fans. So it's kind of a controversial game. Instead, I'm gonna pick another direct sequel for my list. And my pick will be Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. It is not one of the most popular JRPGs on the Wii. It is overshadowed by games like Xenoblade Chronicles or The Last Story, or even other games. But the Wii has the same problem as the GameCube and the 64. There weren't a lot of JRPGs released for it. There were more in Japan, but we only got like 20-something, 25 I think. And saying half of them are kind of forgettable, mediocre, or bad. And the other half is pretty damn good. So maybe it's not the best pick. I think Symphonia 2 is more underrated than Fire Emblem. But I think I'm gonna stick with Fire Emblem. It also got a lot of shit because they messed up the difficulty. They forgot to include an easy mode. So if you play the game, you're gonna meet the easy. You're gonna see the easy and the normal mode, and that's it. But they fucked up. It's actually normal and hard. So play that game on easy because you're actually playing the real normal mode. And if you play on normal, you're playing on hard. Remember that. That's my pick. What about you guys? Arc Rise Fantasia. I think it's more of a hidden gem, but nice pick. That's a really solid pick. Great game. Muramasa. Definitely, I think Muramasa didn't get the attention it deserved. Pandora's Tower, maybe. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I couldn't finish it because of the stupid motion controls. I can't stand that shit. Spectros Origins, I'm not sure. I think it's a good action RPG, but it just gets old quickly. Moving on to the Wii U. Moving on to the Switch. Now, seriously, the Wii U, I mean, damn, guys. I mean, I think it's, I think the 64 has more RPGs than the Wii U. And then there's a bunch of Kemco RPGs. Should we mention them? The Revenant Saga is one of them, and Revenant Saga is actually one of the best Kemco RPGs I've played. So sure, why the hell not? I'm gonna pick Revenant Saga as the most underrated of them all. I mean, calling a Kemco RPG underrated is... it's kinda... But it's one of the best Kemco RPGs, Revenant Saga. So it's there, digital, and it's one of the first consoles where it was released. It later came on the PS3, 360 I think, and then PC, and then PS4, and whatever, PS Vita. But I think the Wii U was one of its first homes, if not the first console where the game was released. I think it's the first one. I could be wrong though, but Revenant Saga, turn-based RPG, pretty good story, it's a good game, it's a good time. So I think it's overlooked, and it should be considered as one of the best Kemco RPGs. Moving on to the Switch. I have a weird pick for the Switch. So for the Switch I picked the Diofield Chronicle. Even though I didn't play it on the Switch. I played it on the PS4, but on the PS4 I have another game. And if I wanted to include both games, because I think that Diofield Chronicle is severely, criminally underrated, I had to put it on another console. So the Diofield Chronicle, I think it's almost a masterpiece. It got almost everything right. It could have used a little more budget, more production values to expand the game a little bit more, to expand the gameplay mechanics, maybe to expand the story and the character development. In the end, I don't want to spoil the ending for you, but what's up with that ending? I mean, what happened to the other characters? What the hell, right? I think they ran out of budget at the end in terms of storytelling. And that was the game's biggest flaw, because everything else, in my opinion, is freaking perfect. I think it's an amazing game, but it did not get the ratings it deserved, in my opinion. What about you guys? The Switch has a lot of JRPGs, so start shooting right now. Dragon Quest Builders? I haven't played it, but that's a game that doesn't get discussed very often, so okay. The Langrisser remix, definitely, but they're more on the hidden gem side. Monster Hunter Stories, definitely agree with that. It was a Capcom game, a Monster Hunter game. It came out, did a lot of noise, but then it eventually died and people forgot about it. Neo: The World Ends With You, the sequel. I think the sequel is better than the original. Live Alive, the remake, solid choice. I don't think it was as popular as Square Enix expected it to be. Shining Resonance, let's move on. Moving on to Game Boy and Game Boy Color, I'm gonna rank them at the same time. I have a weird pick, it's called Gargoyle's Quest. It's arguably an RPG. I mean, you do visit towns and level up and talk to people, and then you go into the side-scrolling missions that are hard as hell, because of course Gargoyle's Quest is a little bit, I mean, it's part of the Ghosts and Goblins franchise, so of course it had to be stupidly hard. Lufia had a game on the Game Boy Color, it's called Lufia The Legend Returns. That's a great pick. That was gonna be my pick. In fact, man, I already picked Gargoyle's Quest, but for the Game Boy Color, my pick will be Lufia. Definitely. Thanks for bringing it up. There's Power Quest. It's an RPG, a fighting game RPG, but I think it's more of a hidden gem, and it's not that great. It gets very repetitive over time. Lufia. Roland's Curse. Those are little top-down view action RPGs. They're pretty good. They're pretty good, you know, solid pick. Okay, let's move on to the Game Boy Advance. My pick is the a certain remaster, remake, whatever you want to call it, of a game that nobody knows it's there. And that's Shining Force. People, of course, Shining Force, people know the Genesis game. Amazing game, legendary, influential, people know. It's not underrated, people fucking know it. But what about the Game Boy Advance port? And that's the one that I first played and finished. I loved it. A lot of people don't know it. And the reviews weren't that... I mean, it just didn't get the best ratings because they changed the art style a little bit, but it still looks beautiful and doesn't look deformed. It's just not. And it has some interface that, I mean, it's the Game Boy Advance. The Genesis runs better than the Game Boy Advance, actually, believe it or not. But there's nothing wrong with this port. It's called The Resurrection of the Shining Dragon on the Game Boy Advance. That's my pick, guys. Same old game with some new additions, some new characters. You know, I think it's the best version to play of Shining Force. That's just my opinion. But it's underrated because people just don't fucking know it. And they just didn't appreciate that remake or remaster. I think it's just a remaster with some new features. And they're just sticking with their guns with the Genesis version. I respect that. Shining Soul, someone's saying. Shining Soul 1 is pretty bad. Shining Soul 2 is decent. I don't think I can agree, but if that's your pick, that's cool. Boktai is a good series, but I find it hard to see the RPG elements in those games, especially the first one. I played the first one and I was like, this doesn't feel like an RPG at all. The second one feels more like an action RPG, but the first one not really. But yeah, Boktai I think needs more love. The Bomberman RPG. It's arguably not an RPG, but I can see where you're going. I covered it recently in my compilation of Hidden Gems videos. Bomberman Tournament, right? The Super Robot Wars 1 and 2. I was gonna pick those two games. It was either those games or the Summon Night games. However, I think they're more hidden gems than anything. I don't think people know those games a lot. They're very, very obscure. Boktai 1 and 2, Sword of Mana, that's the first Seiken Densetsu, right? That's the first remake, got two remakes. The second remake was on the PS Vita. But yeah, the Sword of Mana didn't get a lot of attention, you're right. Moving on to the Nintendo DS. On the Nintendo DS, I picked Suikoden Tear Cries. Why? Because I'm a Suikoden diehard fan. And Suikoden Tear Cries, that's a very overlooked game, didn't get the best ratings. Sure, it's not one of the best Suikoden games, it's a spin-off. There are no war battles, no duels, it's just your regular turn-based system with 4 party members only. But you know why? If you can put the differences aside, you gotta understand it's a spin-off. Konami was trying to do something different. And I think it's a fantastic game. It's no masterpiece, but I think it's a really good game that gets overshadowed by the big ones like the Final Fantasy ports, like all Square Enix games released on the Nintendo DS, all Atlus games, all the Shin Megami Tensei games, there's a lot, Radiant Historia, games like that usually get all the praise. Suikoden Tear Cries doesn't get a lot of praise, and I think it deserves more. What about you guys? Drone Tactics. Well, that's a really stupidly obscure game. I don't see why a game that obscure is underrated, but I respect that it's a solid strategy RPG. Nights in the Nightmare, are you kidding me, man? I hate that game. Some of the Etrian Odyssey games, I'm not a fan of any of them, but yeah. Sola to Robo, I agree. That's a very underrated game, and it's not that obscure, especially not since it's overly expensive nowadays. Anyway, World Destruction, you're probably referring to Sands of Destruction. Sands of Destruction, definitely. The Inazuma 11 games, maybe, but those never came out to North America. All of them stayed in Europe. And I'm not really a fan of sports games. I know it's a soccer RPG, but I wasn't a big fan. Moving on to the 3DS. For the 3DS, I chose two games that are more popular than they were before, and those are Project Cross Zone 1 and 2, the massive crossovers that you guys have seen me praising over and over again. I freaking love them with a passion. Massive crossovers from characters from Sega, from Nintendo, from Bandai Namco, from a lot of companies. Capcom is there, man, and I think they're fantastic games. The reason why they didn't get the best ratings or not a lot of popularity or not a lot of mainstream attention is because one, they're crossovers, and two, they're strategy RPGs. And they are the type of strategy RPGs where missions are stupidly long. I mean, you play one mission and 1 hour later you finally finished it. There are missions that are like 2 hours long. So yeah, I get it, the games are not for everybody, but man, they're so good and they're balanced. They aren't that hard, they aren't easy, they're balanced. I think everybody can get into them, especially if you're a fan of Capcom characters or Konami characters, Konami, Namco, Sega, yeah. So those are my picks. I was gonna go with Soul Hackers, but I think Shin Megami Tensei is very popular nowadays, finally. So no, I'm sticking my gun with those games. What about you guys? Persona Q1 and 2. Yeah, I like them. I finished the first one. Seven Dragon, I think it's very obscure. A lot of people don't know that game because it's the only one of that series that came out to North America. Stella Glow, maybe. It's more of a hidden gem to me, but yeah. I will definitely call it underrated. We're done with Nintendo, so we're gonna start with PlayStation now. And for the PlayStation 1, remember that series I did called Criminally Underrated? I cover all PlayStation consoles and the Super Nintendo. So my pick for my number one on the most criminally underrated JRPG on the PlayStation 1 is Vandal Hearts. And I'm sticking to my guns. I fucking love that game. I didn't get the attention it deserved, didn't get the ratings. People said it was too short, that the art style was kind of ugly. I don't know, I mean, that game is freaking phenomenal. Sure, it should have been a little bit longer, but we're talking about a game from 1996 or 7, I think. Come on. All JRPGs back then were like 20 hours long and that's it. And the art style, what? You can't play a game without your super overly cute anime waifus? I mean, come on. I mean, there's a really sexy archer in that game, right? She's sexy as fuck. Anyway, I mean, definitely Vandal Hearts for me. What about you guys? Thousand Arms? Could be. Wild Arms is popular, but it's not as popular as it should be, right? Jade Cocoon might be too obscure for an underrated turn, but yeah, I can see why. I can see where you're coming from. Breath of Fire 4. Well, I'll give you this. Breath of Fire 4 is very popular, but it's not as popular as 3. Threads of Fate? I couldn't get into it, and I tried that game twice. Musashi, of Cartia. Thanks, my man. Cartia was my second pick. Legend of Legaia, of course. I think it's a forgotten game. It used to be very popular back in the day. Nowadays, people have forgot about it. Moving on to the PlayStation 2, I picked Dot Hack GU, the trilogy. Why? You're probably wondering, isn't that very popular? It was very popular. Hack GU is the same as Legend of Legaia. Got a lot of attention back then, great reviews and great ratings, but eventually people stopped giving a shit about it, people forgot about it, and nowadays not even its remasters on PS4 and Switch helped it a lot. I thought the remasters would help the trilogy sell a lot more and become mainstream once again, return to its glory, and it just didn't. I mean, it's not the best pick, I know, because it's a popular game, but it's just not as popular as I think it should have been. What about you guys? PlayStation 2, Legaia 2. Okay, I didn't like it, but I never gave it a proper chance. Shadow Hearts are way too often in underrated lists. I don't think they're underrated anymore. Wizardry, Tales of the Forsaken Land. That's just very obscure. Digital Devil Saga, maybe, they're kind of underrated. Radiata Stories, my man, bravo. Give this guy a medal. Radiata Story, that's the true most underrated JRPG on the PlayStation 2. I'm sticking to Dot Hack GU, that's my pick. But man, Tales of Legendia, great pick, man. I agree. E6, Rogue Galaxy is kind of popular, but yeah, kinda. Come on, who said Tales of the Abyss? That's one of the most popular on the PlayStation 2, man. Grandia 3, definitely underrated. Suikoden 5 and Wild Arms 3, oh my god. That's it, let's move on. I think the PlayStation 2 is home to is the underrated mother of JRPGs. Alright, so PlayStation 3, my pick is Eternal Sonata. I think it was praised, people praised it, people like it, but a lot of people also hate it. People can't get into it, it's difficult. I finished both versions, this version and 360 version. The PS3 version is the definitive version and it's harder. It's definitely harder, but I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's a freaking masterpiece, and it just doesn't get discussed as often, it doesn't get covered that much, and it's a game that back then a lot of people overlooked. Nowadays it's more popular, but back then people just didn't give a shit about it, and it was eventually overlooked by the Tales games, even the Trails games, Persona, and all those JRPGs, the Final Fantasy games, you know. But man, Eternal Sonata eventually died out and became a forgotten game. Man, that's so unfair. I think it's just such a beautiful game. That's my pick. What about you guys? Tales of Grace SF? It definitely deserves more attention. The Dusk Trilogy? Yeah. Someone saying Nier or Lost Dimension. I totally agree. Definitely. I'm staying with Eternal Sonata over Nier, even though I like Nier more. Let me tell you why. Because Nier has gotten more popular and it's gotten more respect. And nowadays it's kind of mainstream, especially thanks to Replicant. So people know it, people respect it, right? Trinity Souls of Zeal, I think it's very, very obscure. Did someone say Demon Souls? Come on. Drakengard 3. Arton Elico 3 didn't get the ratings it deserved. Arno Surge. Arno Surge is definitely underrated. Anyway, moving on to the PlayStation 4. Okay, so my pick was the Diofield Chronicle, but I put that on the Switch. So I'm staying with Soul Hackers 2. Definitely. Soul Hackers 2, and that's a game that if you're a fan of that game, you'll agree with me, it got a lot of hate. It did not deserve the hatred it got, and that's supposed to be a mainstream RPG. Why is it underrated? Why is it so underrated? But because people know it, and most people just gave it a bad rating or a mediocre rating. I mean, come on guys. It's not a masterpiece. Like Soul Hackers 2 fucking must play it, no. But it's a great game, man, and I just think it got a lot of undeserved hate. That's the only reason, man. That's my pick. That's why I picked a popular game over a hidden gem. What about you guys? Someone said Sakura Wars. Definitely underrated. God Eater 3. Someone said God Eater 3. But anyway, Code Vein is another underrated game. It got a lot of fucking hate and a lot of undeserved ratings. Star Ocean 5. I don't think so. I think it's the worst Star Ocean, but it's not a bad game in my opinion. That's it, guys. Moving on to the PSP, in my original video, I picked Jeanne d'Arc. Of course, I could have picked Trails in the Sky, but both games are very well rated nowadays, but just not rated by many people. So I think Jeanne d'Arc is a game that it's gotten a lot of respect nowadays. It probably shouldn't be there in this video, but I think it's a game that still a lot of people don't know, a lot of people haven't played, and it just didn't get enough ratings. It got great ratings, but not enough. That's my argument. Jeanne d'Arc. It's an exclusive on the PSP, that's also its downfall. I think this game could benefit greatly from a modern remaster, just like Trails in the Sky. But Trails in the Sky, I picked Jeanne d'Arc over Trails in the Sky because Sky is a popular series nowadays. Someone saying Hexis Force, good pick. Valkyria Chronicles 3, but that's an only in Japan game. We said no only in Japan. Is the Odin Felgana, very underrated, coming soon. The remaster is coming soon, I think. Valkyria Chronicles 2, maybe? Yeah, Fate Extra definitely. Fate Extra is probably my real number one, but I think it's more obscure and I just think it's not a game for everybody. But I like Fate Extra way more than Jeanne d'Arc. Grow Lancer. You mean Wayfarer of Time. I agree. It's more obscure than underrated, but yeah, I agree. Moving on to the PS Vita. The PS Vita, we got Lost Dimension. That's my pick. Lost Dimension, I don't think it got the ratings it deserved. It's no masterpiece. It's not a game that everybody's gonna go crazy for it. But I think it's got really unique and original ideas. I think it's a really solid game, and I just think it should have been more popular. The idea of that game was not to make it as look at the game, look at the graphics, look at the battle mechanics, look at everything in this game. It's not really a mainstream. It was never Lancarce's or Atlus's intention to make this game a mainstream RPG, but I just think it could have got more attention, and it shouldn't. My point is that it shouldn't be a hidden gem, because it's also a hidden gem. Most people don't know this game. It's also on PS3, by the way, and on Steam. Oh yeah, on Steam. But it just didn't get enough ratings, and the very few ratings it got, most of them are kind of mediocre or mixed, and I don't know, I think it's a fantastic game. What about you guys? Valkyria Revolution, it got a digital only release. Maybe that's the reason why a lot of people don't know Revolution is on the PS Vita. God Eater 2, solid pick. Tales of Hearts. Tales of Hearts I think is one of the most popular, but it's not one of the most popular Tales games, is it? So I'll give you that. Freedom Wars, it did not get the attention it deserved. Definitely underrated. Anyway, Muramasa got its glory on the PS Vita, but it's still kind of underrated, you're right. Mind Zero got a lot of hate, and I never finished it, so I can't talk much about it. Exist Archive, definitely, I think it's a game that... It's not 100% a hidden gem anymore. People know it, but it's still there. It's still kind of obscure. And that's a great bit. Exist Archive, it's in my video, I think. Grand Kingdom, maybe. It's a grind fest. Not a lot of people will be able to get into that game. On the Sega Master System, I picked Golden Axe Warrior. It's a Zelda clone, but it has way more RPG elements than Zelda. You visit way more towns. The exploration is much bigger. Overall, it attempted to be a better game than Zelda, and it failed miserably. It got good reviews, but nobody knows that game. Golden Axe Warrior. It's not a beat 'em up. It's an action-adventure role-playing game, and it's arguably not an RPG. But that's my pick. The Master System is like the 64. There's barely any JRPGs in there, and the other ones are Ys, very popular game. Phantasy Star, very popular game, and what else is there? Miracle Warriors, that game fucking sucks. Anyway guys, so moving on to the Genesis, I picked Warsong. Why Warsong? Langreaser. I think it was a hidden gem back then. Nowadays I think it's more popular because of Langreaser, because of the Langreaser remasters, but still people don't appreciate this game. And they don't know Warsong is one of the most influential strategy RPGs in history. They don't know that. Sega CD, I had to pick a hidden gem, a very obscure game, because the other ones are very popular. I picked Dark Wizard, another strategy RPG. I don't think it's that underrated because it's a bit boring. I'll confess it's not the best strategy RPG, but it had great ideas, solid stories, decent storytelling for its time, and the campaigns, while long and with an outdated interface, they're still kind of enjoyable. It didn't age that poorly. Moving on to the Sega Saturn, every JRPG released on the Sega Saturn is underrated. The console itself is underrated. So take your pick, guys. So I'm picking Dragon Force, another greatly influential strategy RPG nobody talks about. Dragon Force, amazing game. Anyway, moving on to the Dreamcast, I picked Evolution 1 and 2. I'm not really a fan of those games, but what else is there? I'm picking Evolution 1 and 2 because while not exactly a fan of those two games, I think they should have been more popular, and when people think of Dreamcast JRPGs, those are the ones that should be up there with Grandia and Skies of Arcadia and shit. For the Game Gear, I got Crystal Warriors. It didn't age well, it's not that fun to play anymore, but back then it was kind of influential. Just like Langreaser, people didn't pay attention, and you guys are not gonna believe this. Crystal Warriors is the first strategy JRPG ever released outside of Japan. And nobody fucking knows it. So that's my only reason, that's my only argument. It's not that great of a game. And finally guys, you wanna talk about the Xbox? For the Xbox original, there's barely any JRPGs in there. In fact, I don't think there's a single one released in North America. So I'm picking Blackstone. It's a Diablo Baldur's Gate clone. But the RPG elements are there. I mean, there are others, you know, like the Sudeki and Jade Empire, but those are not Japanese role-playing games. Those are Western RPGs, I think. So a Japanese role-playing game, Blackstone. So for the 360, instead of going for Star Ocean: The Last Hope, I'm gonna pick Infinite on Discovery. Because The Last Hope, like I said, it's gotten a little bit more popular. A little bit over the course of time, just not enough. But I don't think Star Ocean The Last Hope got the ratings it deserved. So it's a close tie, but Infinite on Discovery is an exclusive on the 360. Definitely didn't get the ratings it deserved. It's no masterpiece, and it's hard to get into, and it does have some balancing issues. But if you can get past that, you will encounter a great game. And it's kind of slow. Infinite on Discovery is a game that it's gonna take people a while to love it. It's gonna take people a while to enjoy it. But man, it's a great game. You're not gonna be, oh man, masterpiece, this is one of the best in the 360. It's not, but it just didn't get the ratings it deserved. Yeah, that's my pick, Infinite on Discovery. I think it's a great game that deserves a little bit more better ratings. Let's leave it at that. And for the Xbox One, because I didn't choose Valkyria Revolution on the PS4 or on the Vita, I'm gonna pick it on the Xbox One. I never played it on the Xbox One, but it's there in case you care, in case you have an Xbox One and don't have a PS4. That's weird. If you like JRPGs, why the fuck would you have an Xbox One instead of a PS4? But I respect that. Know that that game is there, and it's criminally underrated. It's a game that it just didn't get the ratings it deserved. It got trashed a lot. It's a great JRPG destroyed by critics. Check it out, guys. Valkyria Revolution is a really solid pick. It's no masterpiece. It does have some gameplay issues, but I mean, that's a fantastic game. Someone saying Ys Origin. That's a good pick too. Ys Origin needs more attention, but it's everywhere. It's on the Switch, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, Steam, Vita. It's everywhere, man. So it's everywhere for a reason. And if anybody cares about the TurboGrafx, I picked Dragon Slayer. That's it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. Dragon Slayer is actually a good game, and it didn't get the ratings it deserved. So I guess I should say, see you next time.